She didn't see it coming. One second, Marisela Brooks was standing in the most beautiful ballroom she had ever set foot in, smoothing the front of her custom black gown, searching the crowd for her husband's face. The next second, a wave of cold red wine crashed across her chest like a slap from the universe itself, soaking through silk, staining diamonds, stealing the breath from every corner of the room. And the man holding the empty glass was laughing. Not the quiet, embarrassed kind of laugh. The kind that meant he wanted everyone to see. The kind that said, "You don't belong here, and now everyone knows it." If you have ever been in a room where the laughter was aimed at you, where you could feel strangers' eyes peel you apart like you were something to be examined rather than someone to be respected, then you already know what Marisela felt in that moment. The question is, what would you have done? If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel don't let you go easy. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already part of this family, you already know. Stay until the end. Because the ending of this one, nobody in that ballroom saw it coming, not even close. The evening had started, as most catastrophic evenings do, with something that looked exactly like a good idea. Marisela Brooks had spent 43 years learning to read a room before she walked into it. Not because she was paranoid, not because she was bitter, but because her mother, a woman who raised 2 daughters on a schoolteacher's salary in Memphis, Tennessee, who pressed their church dresses herself every Sunday morning and inspected their shoes for scuffs before they left the house, had told her something when she was 11 years old that she never forgot. "Mari, baby, the world will form its opinion of you in about 4 seconds. Your job is to make sure it's forming the right one." Her mother had not meant that as a sad thing. She had said it the same way she said everything else. Practical, clear, without self-pity. It was simply a fact of life, the same as weather. You didn't argue with it, you prepared for it. So Marisela had spent her whole life preparing. She dressed carefully. She spoke deliberately. She walked into every unfamiliar space with her spine straight and her chin level, because she had learned early that the moment you looked uncertain, other people rushed to fill that uncertainty with their own conclusions about who you were and what you deserved. She was good at it by now. The composure, the measured smile, the polite way she could deflect a cutting remark without letting anyone see whether it landed. But she had not been prepared for Seoul. Not for the scale of it, the weight of it, the sheer impossible extravagance of the Grand Vesper Hotel rising against the night sky like something out of a film she hadn't been invited to audition for. Not for the valets in white gloves or the chandeliers that spilled light across the lobby like something precious being poured out. Not for the way the other guests moved through the space as though they had been born in rooms like this. As though marble floors and champagne flutes were simply the natural environment of their particular species. And certainly not for the fact that her husband, the man who had flown her first class from Chicago 3 days ago, who had kissed her forehead at the hotel room door that evening and told her he would meet her downstairs, was nowhere to be found. She checked her phone again, 7:48. The invitation had said 8. She was early, which she always was, because being late felt like giving people a head start on doubting you. She scrolled to his last text message, "I'll find you, sweetheart. You'll know me when you see me," and pressed her lips together at the familiar tease in his words. Dante never missed an entrance. She had learned that about him in the 2 years since he had walked into her accountant's office in Chicago and turned what was supposed to be a 40-minute consultation into a 3-hour conversation that ended with him asking if she would let him take her to dinner. She had said no. Twice. He had asked a third time, and she had said yes, mostly because she had run out of polite ways to refuse a man who looked at her the way Dante Viscari looked at her, like she was the only interesting thing in whatever room they happened to share. She still wasn't entirely sure what to make of that, of him, of any of it. She tucked her phone into her clutch and lifted her chin and walked through the double doors into the ballroom, because standing in the lobby waiting would only give her more time to feel the edges of her uncertainty, and Marisela Brooks did not have the patience for her own uncertainty tonight. The ballroom was, there was no other word for it, extraordinary. Thousands of white roses arranged in towers that scraped the ceiling. Tables dressed in champagne silk with place settings that probably cost more than her first car. A string quartet in the far corner playing something understated and European, while guests drifted between conversation clusters in their couture gowns and their tailored suits, laughing the particular laugh of people who had never had to worry about the bill. Marisela scanned the room methodically, the way her mother had taught her, starting at the left wall and moving right. She was looking for Dante's dark hair, his height, the particular stillness he carried in his shoulders that made him visible in any crowd. She was not looking at the other guests. She was not interested in them, and for the first few minutes they appeared equally uninterested in her. Then she felt it. Not a sound, not a word. Just a shift in the air, the way a room's energy changes when attention lands somewhere it wasn't expected. She had felt it before. She recognized it the way you recognize a smell from childhood, instantly, in the body, before the mind has time to process. Someone was talking about her. She didn't turn. She kept scanning the room for Dante and pretended she hadn't noticed, because the worst thing you could do in a room like this was let people know that their opinion of you had the power to interrupt what you were doing. Her mother had taught her that too. Is she on the waitstaff? The voice was low but not carrying the clipped, precise accent of old soul money, the kind that had learned English in Switzerland. She's not wearing a uniform, but she must be someone's plus one, a second voice, amused, dismissive. Though I can't imagine whose. She's wearing a necklace, said the first voice, and the way she said the word, stretched out, skeptical, like it was itself suspicious, made something tighten quietly in Marisela's chest. She let out a slow breath. 4 seconds, she thought. Make sure it's the right one. She turned, not fast, not defensive, with the same measured composure she had worn into every difficult room for the past 43 years, and she looked at the two women watching her. They were perhaps 10 years older than she was, draped in the kind of effortless elegance that required enormous amounts of effort to maintain. One of them wore a gown the color of old ivory. The other, the one who had spoken, stood slightly in front, the way people do when they've decided they're the authority on something. Marisela had never seen either of them before in her life. She smiled, the way her mother had taught her, with warmth that did not ask for anything in return. "Good evening," she said. The woman in ivory blinked, as though she hadn't expected to be addressed directly. Then her chin lifted just slightly in the reflexive adjustment of someone recalibrating their position. "Are you a guest?" she asked. Not rudely, not yet. The way you ask a question when you've already decided what the answer is, and you're simply waiting for the person to confirm your assumption. "I am," Marisela said pleasantly. "Whose table?" said the other woman, the one who'd spoken first. Her name, Marisela would learn later, was Su Yeon Kwon, the only daughter of Chairman Kwon Hyung-jae, whose holdings spanned shipping, hospitality, and a significant portion of the Korean luxury retail market. In a room full of wealthy people, Su Yeon Kwon was by most measures the wealthiest. She carried that fact the way some people carry weapons, within reach at all times, available to deploy on short notice. "The host invited me personally," Marisela said. Something shifted in Su Yeon Kwon's expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the slight rearrangement of features that precedes enjoyment. "The host," she repeated. "Yes." "And do you know the host?" "I do," Marisela said. "Very well." Su Yeon's lips curved, slow and deliberate. She turned to her companion the way people turn to share a private joke, and it was the turning away that stung more than anything else. The implication that Marisela wasn't worth maintaining eye contact with while she was being doubted. "Of course," Su Yeon said, returning her gaze but not her attention. "I'm sure you do." Marisela held her smile and excused herself, because continuing that conversation would have cost her something she wasn't willing to spend, and she moved deeper into the ballroom. She pulled out her phone and sent Dante a simple text. "Where are you?" She watched it deliver, watched the status sit at delivered instead of read, put the phone away, kept moving. Around her, the party filled itself in, guests arriving in clusters, the noise level rising in layers, the chandeliers above throwing light that caught the edges of earrings and champagne bubbles, and the sequined details of gowns that moved like water. It was genuinely beautiful. She kept reminding herself of that, kept trying to let the beauty of the room be a separate thing from the discomfort gathering quietly at the edges of her evening, because Dante had arranged this trip for her, and she was determined to find something worth savoring. She found a server with a tray and accepted a glass of sparkling water instead of champagne, because she had learned long ago that it was easier to stay sharp in an unfamiliar room if you weren't softened by alcohol. She stood near one of the tall window arrangements, watching the city lights of Seoul pulse and blur 30 floors below. And she thought about her mother and about the dress she was wearing, which had taken a seamstress in Bronzeville 6 weeks to make, and about the diamond necklace at her throat that Dante had clasped himself before sending her downstairs, standing behind her at the mirror with that quiet look on his face that she had never found a word for. She was thinking about that look when she heard the voice again, closer this time. "Excuse me." Soo-yeon Kwon was standing 3 feet away, and she had not come alone. A man had materialized at her right side, tall, built with the particular confidence of someone who had always been taller than everyone else and had never gotten over it. He was handsome in a hard, calculated way, with the kind of jaw that required regular maintenance and a suit that had been made specifically for his body. He was looking at Marisela the way men look at things they're deciding whether or not to bother with. This, she would learn, was Min Jun-cha, Soo-yeon's fiancé, the heir to the Cha Group's logistics division. A man who had sailed through 31 years of life on a combination of family money and the quiet assurance that the world's geography had been arranged for his convenience. "Security would like to see your invitation," Soo-yeon said. She had dropped the polite register. Her voice was flat now, businesslike, the way voices get when someone has decided to stop performing civility. "There's been a concern about unauthorized guests." Marisela looked at her steadily. "I don't have a physical invitation. The host contacted me directly." "The host contacted you," Min-jun said, and there was something in the way he said it, a particular inflection, that light contamination of disbelief, that told her he had been briefed on this conversation and had come to enjoy it. "Which host would that be?" "The person who organized this event," Marisela said. "And who is that exactly?" "My husband." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then Min-jun laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was worse, the quiet, private kind shared between him and Soo-yeon, like something passed between old friends who'd been waiting for the punchline. Soo-yeon pressed her fingers to her lips in the gesture women use when they're pretending to suppress something they're actually amplifying. "Your husband," Soo-yeon said. "Yes." "And what is your husband's name?" Marisela looked at her for a long moment. She thought about what her mother would say. She thought about what was easiest and what was right, and she understood, as she had understood in every room like this one, going all the way back to being 11 years old in Memphis with her church shoes polished and her dress pressed, that those two things were rarely the same. "Dante Vescari," she said. The name landed like a stone in still water. She watched the ripple move across Soo-yeon's face, a flicker of something, quickly suppressed, replaced by a harder, more deliberate expression than the amused contempt that had been there before. "That's not possible," Soo-yeon said. But her voice had changed. Something in it had gotten careful. "I understand why you might think so," Marisela said. "But it is." "Dante Vescari is not married," Soo-yeon said. She spoke with the confidence of someone quoting a fact they consider settled. Everyone knows that. And there it was. The specific flavor of this particular room's certainty about what was possible and what was not, about what belonged here and what had wandered in by mistake. Marisela had encountered versions of this certainty her whole life, in rooms far less grand than this one, and in rooms far less grand in their cruelty. She had learned to stand inside it without letting it push her. She had learned to stay upright while it moved through her. "All the same," she said quietly, "it's the truth." Something happened then in Soo-yeon Kwon's eyes. A decision being made. A line being approached and then stepped across with full awareness. Later, Marisela would wonder if Soo-yeon had been angry or scared or simply had never in her life had a reason to stop before reaching for what she wanted. She would never arrive at a satisfying answer. What she knew was what happened next. Min Jun-cha reached out with one hand, unhurried and deliberate as a man performing a motion he had rehearsed, and closed his fingers around the stem of his full wine glass. His eyes met Marisela's. He smiled the way people smile when they want you to understand that what is about to happen is intentional. And then he turned the glass. The red wine didn't splash so much as fall, a sudden, cold, catastrophic weight of it, cascading down the front of Marisela's black gown, spreading through the silk in a bloom of deep crimson that moved faster than she could process it, soaking through to her skin before she had time to step back. It hit the diamond necklace and ran in rivulets down her collarbone. It reached the hem of her dress and dripped, slowly, onto the floor at her feet. The nearest guest turned at the sound of it. Then more guests turned at the sight of them turning. The string quartet in the corner played on, a few notes longer, before the violinist finally noticed and let the music falter into silence. In the quiet that followed, Min Juncha's smile widened. "I'm sorry," he said, in a tone that contained no apology whatsoever. "I didn't see you there." The laughter started near the back. A few people, low at first, tentative, the way laughter starts in a group when it's waiting for permission. Then Soo-yeon's smile gave that permission, and the room laughed. Not everyone, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to fill the space. Enough for the sound to press against Marisela's skin like something physical. She did not cry. She had not cried in a room like this since she was 19, when she had sat in a financial aid office at a university that had decided it wasn't interested in accommodating her request for additional scholarship consideration, and the woman behind the desk had looked at her in a way that required no translation. She had cried in her car afterward, alone, where it didn't cost her anything. She had never cried in front of the room. She was not going to start tonight. She stood in the center of the ballroom. $60 pedicure invisible, inside soaked shoes, 6 weeks of a seamstress's work ruined, her mother's voice running somewhere quiet and steady beneath everything else. And she looked at Min Juncha with an expression so still it eventually made him uncomfortable enough to look away first. Then she straightened her spine, set her chin level, and waited for her husband. The laughter didn't stop all at once. That was the thing about it. It died down in patches, the way a fire goes out unevenly, some corners still burning while others had already gone cold and dark. A few guests near the far tables had stopped laughing almost immediately, their faces settling into the careful neutrality of people who weren't sure yet which direction the wind was blowing. But the cluster around Soo-yeon Kwon kept going, kept feeding off each other the way groups do when someone with enough status decides that something is funny, and that permission has been granted. Marisela stood in the center of it and breathed. That was all. She breathed, slow and deliberate, drawing air down into the bottom of her lungs the way her mother had taught her when she was small, and the world felt too loud and too large and too unwilling to make room for her. "You breathe first," her mother had said. "You breathe before you do anything else, because if you move before you breathe, you'll move wrong." The wine was cold against her skin. Not uncomfortable, cold. There was something almost clarifying about it, the way shock sometimes sharpens rather than blurs, pulling the edges of a moment into sudden, brutal focus. She could feel the silk of her gown clinging to her stomach, to her ribs. She could feel the dampness along her collarbone, where the wine had reached the diamond necklace and run beneath it. She could feel, with precise and almost clinical awareness, the exact location of every single eye in the room that was currently looking at her. There were a lot of them. She did not look back at Min Juncha. That was the first decision she made. Conscious, intentional, final. Looking at him gave him something. She wasn't willing to give him anything, not even the evidence that she found him worth looking at. She kept her eyes straight ahead, focused on the middle distance, and she breathed. Minjun was saying something behind her. She could hear him in her peripheral awareness the way you hear a television left on in another room. Noise with shape, but without content she was choosing to receive. He was performing, she understood. The laugh, the upturned glass, the expression he'd worn doing it. It had all been performance, staged for a specific audience. He needed her to react. He needed her to cry, or yell, or flee, because any of those responses would confirm the story he was trying to tell about her. She wasn't going to give him the story, but her hands were shaking, not visibly. She'd pushed them together in front of her, right over left, fingers interlaced, which gave them something to press against. But she could feel the tremor running through her palms, and she hated it. Not because it meant she was afraid, but because it meant her body was honest in ways she hadn't authorized. "Someone should call a maid," Soo-yeon said, loud enough to carry. She had recovered her composure completely, which told Marisela something important about her. Soo-yeon Kwon had done something like this before. Not this exactly, maybe, but something in the same territory. This wasn't her first time standing in the aftermath of someone else's humiliation with that particular look of effortless satisfaction on her face. A few people laughed again, brief and sharp. A woman to Marisela's left, someone she'd never seen, someone in a silver gown with a champagne flute in her hand and her phone already raised and aimed, said something in Korean that Marisela didn't catch, and the woman beside her responded, and they both watched with the alert, hungry attention of people consuming something. The recording had started. She was aware of that. She didn't look at the phone. She looked for a server, found one hovering at the edge of the scene with the expression of someone who desperately wanted to be somewhere else, and made brief eye contact. The server, a young man, maybe 23, wearing the hotel's burgundy vest with his name tag slightly crooked, looked back at her with something that might have been sympathy if sympathy wasn't expensive in a room like this. He moved toward her with a small stack of cocktail napkins, and she accepted them with a quiet thank you that she meant. She pressed one napkin to her collarbone. It soaked through in seconds. She pressed another. She was not going to stand here and dab wine off herself in front of 60 guests for longer than she had to, so she stopped after the second napkin and simply held them at her side, which was a choice about what image she was willing to leave in the memory of everyone watching. A hand landed on her arm. She turned, and it was the event manager, a Korean woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a dark blazer, her hair pulled back with the precise severity of someone whose job involved maintaining order in rooms where order was frequently under threat. Her name tag said Ji-Hae Park, Senior Events Coordinator in English and Korean. She had the expression of a woman walking a tightrope over something she didn't want to fall into. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "perhaps we can step outside and—" "I'm fine where I am," Marisela said. Ji-Hae Park's mouth tightened. "Ma'am, I think it might be better if we—" "I said I'm fine." Not loud, not rude, just clear, in the way that things have to be clear sometimes, with a weight underneath the words that made them load-bearing. "I'm waiting for my husband." Ji-Hae Park looked at her with an expression that Marisela recognized, the specific discomfort of someone caught between what they could see was wrong and what they were being paid to manage. She was a professional. She'd handled scenes before. She wasn't unkind. Marisela could see that, could see the flicker of genuine uncertainty in her eyes. But the room had an economy, and in that economy, the opinions of Soo-Yeon Kwon and her table carried a weight that Ji-Hae Park could not simply ignore. "Who is your husband, ma'am? If I can verify your guest status, I can help resolve—" "His name is Dante Vescari," Marisela said. "He organized this event. That's what he told me." Something moved across Ji-Hae Park's face. Not the same thing that had moved across Soo-Yeon's face when she'd heard the name. This was different, more complicated. A flicker of something that might have been surprise, and underneath it, something that looked disturbingly close to alarm. "I'm sorry?" she said. "Dante Vescari," Marisela repeated, patient and even. "He told me this party was a business function he'd organized, and that I should meet him here at 8 o'clock. That is all I know. He has not been answering my texts for the past 20 minutes, which I would very much like to discuss with him when he arrives." Ji-Hae Park was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with very careful precision, "Mr. Vescari did not provide a guest list to the hotel. The event booking was made through a private coordinator." "All right," Marisela said. "Then contact the private coordinator." "I'm working to do that, ma'am. In the meantime, Marisela said, "I'm going to stand right here." From somewhere behind her, Soo-Yeon's voice. "She's clearly not on any list. Ji-Hae, this is not a difficult situation." Ji-Hae Park's jaw moved slightly. She looked past Marisela to where Soo-Yeon was standing, and whatever she saw in that look settled something in her expression. Not comfort, not agreement, but the quiet resignation of someone who had done the math and didn't like the answer. "Ma'am," she said to Marisela, "I'm going to need to ask you to wait in the lobby while I make some calls." "I'm not going to the lobby," Marisela said. "I am a guest at this event, and I am staying in this room." "Ma'am, unless you are prepared to physically remove me," Marisela said, and the word physically landed between them like something placed with intention. "I will be staying right here." Ji-Hae Park took a slow breath. She reached for the earpiece behind her right ear and pressed it lightly, murmuring something in Korean that Marisela could not follow. Then she looked back and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm going to need to call security." "Then call security," Marisela said. "While you're at it, try calling the host." The small crowd that had gathered in the immediate orbit of the scene, maybe 12, maybe 15 people, drawn by the gravity of conflict the way people always are, regardless of how refined their clothes or how expensive their education, shifted and resettled. Someone with a phone got closer. Someone else pulled back, uncomfortable. A man in a steel gray suit, whom Marisela had not noticed before, was watching the scene with an expression she couldn't read. Not amused, not hostile, just watching with an intensity that seemed mismatched to the situation. She filed that away. She filed everything away tonight, because she had learned long ago that you could not afford to let your emotions consume your attention in a hostile room. You observed, you cataloged, you stayed present. Min Jun Cha stepped forward again. He had his hands in his pockets now, which made the whole thing feel casual, relaxed, like a man strolling through a disagreement that mildly entertained him. He had an audience, and he knew it, and he had decided the scene wasn't over yet. "I want to understand something," he said pleasantly. "You're standing in a private event, wearing a gown that you've now managed to ruin." Slight pause, slight smile. "Insisting that one of the most private men in Europe is your husband, and no one here has seen you before, and you have no invitation, and your supposed husband has been unavailable for 20 minutes. He tilted his head. "Does that not strike you as a strange position to be in?" "What strikes me," Marisela said, "is that a grown man deliberately poured wine on a woman he doesn't know, and seems to be waiting for an apology that isn't coming." The breath in the room shifted. Minjun's smile stayed, but his eyes went slightly colder. He had not expected her to speak back. She could see that. The micro-adjustment in his posture, the way his shoulders came up half an inch, the way his eyes did the fast calculation of a man who just realized the game wasn't quite what he'd thought it was. "An apology," he said. "You heard me. For an accident." "You and I both know that wasn't an accident," Marisela said, and she said it the same way she'd said everything else. Not loud, not performing, not for the crowd. Just true. Laid out flat and plain in the air between them. For a moment, something real moved across Min Jun Cha's face. Not guilt. She didn't think he was capable of what guilt required. But something. A fracture, brief and small, in the surface of his composure. Then Su Yan stepped forward and put her hand on his arm, and the fracture sealed. "Ji Hye," Su Yan said, without looking at Marisela, addressing the event coordinator the way she might address a specific appliance. "I'd like this handled. My father is going to arrive within the hour, and I will not have whatever this is still unfolding when he walks through those doors." The mention of her father landed in the room differently than anything else had. Marisela watched it travel, watched the event coordinator's posture shift, watched two of the nearer guests exchange a quick look, watched even Minjun's jaw do something subtle and minute. Chairman Kwan Hyung Jae was, apparently, a name that rearranged people. Ji-hai Park turned to Marisela with the expression of someone who has just received an order they cannot afford to disobey. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." "I'm not leaving this room," Marisela said. "Ma'am, not without being removed." She kept her voice level, kept her hands still. The tremor in her palms had stopped, she realized, at some point in the last 5 minutes. She wasn't sure when. "You can call security, that's your right. But I want it on record. And I want every person in this room to hear me say clearly that I am a guest of the host of this event. I am being detained unlawfully at the request of a private citizen, and I have done nothing wrong." The room was very quiet. Not the polite, drifting quiet of a gathering between conversations. The tight, charged quiet of a group of people witnessing something that had moved past the comfortable edge of social spectacle into something sharper and less certain. Even the few people who had been laughing were not laughing now. The man in the steel gray suit, the one she'd noticed watching, had moved slightly closer. She noticed that. She noticed also that he hadn't spoken, hadn't taken out a phone, hadn't done any of the things the other bystanders were doing. He was simply watching with that same careful attention, and she had the odd, brief impression that he was watching her specifically, not the scene. 2 members of hotel security arrived. They were large men in dark suits, professional and uncomfortable in equal measure, walking the narrow corridor between their job and the particular awkwardness of what they were being asked to do. The taller one, a man who looked like he'd spent his whole career in rooms like this, diffusing situations that people like Su Yan Kwan had lit, stepped up and said, in careful English, "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you from the event." "I understand that," Marisela said. Before you do, I'm asking you to contact the event's host. His name is Dante Vescari. Hi is my husband. I would like you to reach him before you remove me from a room that he personally invited me into." The security guard looked at her. Then he looked at Ji-hye Park. Something passed between them, a question without words. Ji-hye Park said something quiet in Korean. The guard's expression shifted slightly. "Ma'am, the host contact information provided at booking is going to voicemail," the guard said, which told Marisela that someone had already tried. "Then keep trying," she said. "Ma'am, he will answer," she said, and she said it not as a plea or a prayer, but as a fact, the same flat, unambiguous way she'd stated everything else tonight, because it was the only true thing she had left to hold on to in this room, and she was holding on to it with both hands. "He will answer. Keep trying." The guard looked at his colleague. His colleague looked at the floor. Soo-yeon made a sound. Not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. Somewhere in between. The sound of a woman who had run out of patience for something that had already taken too long. "This is absurd. She's either delusional or she's a con artist, and either way she needs to be removed. My father—" "Your father isn't here yet," said a voice from near the back of the cluster of bystanders. Everyone turned. The man who'd spoken was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that had spent a long time outdoors, weathered in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the accumulated evidence of decisions. He was wearing a dark suit that fit well but not expensively, and he was holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't been drinking. He had been one of the first people Marisela noticed when she entered the room. Not for any particular reason, just that her eye had found him and noted him the way her eye found the exits and the bar and the corners where the shadows fell differently. Soo-yeon blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your father isn't here yet," the man repeated pleasantly. "So what he would or wouldn't want isn't currently relevant." He looked at Marisela. "Ma'am, I apologize for what's happened to you this evening. I don't believe you're lying." The silence that followed was a different quality than the silence before. "Who are you?" Min-jun asked, with the particular sharpness of a man who doesn't like being interrupted by someone who hasn't been introduced. "Nobody important," the man said. He took a small sip of his whiskey. "But I've met Dante Vescari twice in the last 4 years, and I can tell you that the things people say about him are mostly true, including the things people say about what happens to people who make him unhappy." He said it conversationally, without drama, without looking at Min-jun. He might have been discussing the weather, which somehow made it worse. Min-jun's posture shifted almost invisibly. Soo-yeon's chin came down half an inch. Ji-hye Park had gone very still. Marisela looked at the older man and gave him a single small nod, because it was all she could manage right now, and because she understood that what he had just done in this room had cost him something in terms of the evening's social arithmetic, and she wasn't going to let it go unacknowledged. The man with silver hair looked away and drank his whiskey. "Remove her," Soo-yeon said, and now her voice had lost the amusement. Now it was flat and hard, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was done having it questioned. "I don't care who she claims to know. Remove her, Ji-hye, or I will make a call that will affect this hotel's relationship with my father's hospitality portfolio for the next 10 years. Do you understand me?" Ji-hye Park looked at Marisela. Her face had closed completely, sealed the way faces seal when people have made a choice they know isn't right and have decided to live with it anyway. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm sorry. You'll need to come with us." The two security guards moved, not roughly, but with the decisive body language of people who had been released from hesitation. Marisela felt the presence of them on either side of her like a change in temperature. She didn't move. She looked at Ji-hye Park and said, with absolute clarity, "One phone call. Give me one phone call before you do this. Call the host. One more time." Ji-hye Park opened her mouth, closed it, and the lights in the ballroom changed. Not much, a subtle dimming, a slight shift in the warmth of the chandeliers, the kind of adjustment that happens automatically on a program timer. But it was enough to pull a dozen eyes upward for just a moment, and in that moment the ballroom's background noise, the resumed murmur of conversation from the guests who had drifted back to their tables, the soft scrape of chair legs, the distant sound of the string quartet warming up again, caught in Marisela's chest like something trying to escape. She was going to be thrown out of a room her husband had filled with flowers for her. She was going to be escorted by strangers across a marble lobby and deposited it outside while the people who'd humiliated her went back to their champagne and their conversations and their comfortable certainty that they had been right about her all along. Unless. She looked at the tall security guard. She looked at him the way her mother had taught her to look at people who had the power to choose. Not pleading, not challenging, just looking, person to person, stripped of everything else. "Please," she said, quietly, just to him. "One more call." The guard held her gaze. A long beat passed. He was a professional, and a professional's job was to follow instructions, and the instructions had been given by someone who paid the hotel's bills. He knew all of that. She could see him knowing it. He reached for his earpiece. He pressed it. He said something in Korean. And then he waited. Soo-yeon made a sharp, impatient sound. "What are you?" The guard held up one hand, and it was such a precise, quiet gesture. Not rude, not aggressive, just the flat-palmed request of a man who needed a moment, that Soo-yeon actually stopped. Marisela stood very still. The guard's face changed. It was small, the way really significant things are often small, at first. A slight slackening around his eyes. A blink that lasted half a beat too long. He took his hand away from his earpiece and looked at his colleague and said something very short and very low in Korean. His colleague looked at Marisela, then back at the guard. Then he straightened his posture in a way that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with a kind of physical recalibration, as though the ground had shifted slightly under his feet and he was finding his footing. Ji-hee Park said, in a voice stripped of every professional register she had maintained for the past 20 minutes. "What did they say?" The guard looked at her. Then he looked at Soo-yeon. Then he looked back at Marisela, and what was in his face now was not the careful neutrality of before. "The coordinator has confirmed," he said slowly in English, "that the host has been contacted." "And," Ji-hee Park said, "he's on his way in." The silence that followed was total. Soo-yeon's face didn't change immediately. That was the interesting thing. It stayed in its position, composed, certain, the face of a woman who did not yet understand what was happening, for a full 3 seconds before something behind it began to shift, the way ice shifts before it cracks, from the inside out. "What does that mean?" she said, and her voice had lost something. A register had gone missing from it. The guard did not answer her. He looked at Marisela instead, and what he gave her was not exactly an apology, because men in his position don't apologize, not in rooms like this. But he stepped back, just slightly. He stepped back, and the other guard stepped back, and the small physical clearing it created, half a foot of marble floor that was suddenly, quietly hers, was not nothing. Min Jun-cha had gone very still beside Soo-yeon. The smile was gone. In its place was something Marisela had not seen on his face before. The beginnings of a calculation being run with data that had just changed dramatically. He reached for Soo-yeon's arm. She didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were on Marisela. And in Soo-yeon Kwan's eyes, beneath the arrogance, beneath the performance, beneath the long and practiced certainty of a woman who had never in her life miscalculated the weight of her own name in a room, Marisela saw the first thin edge of something that she recognized from Memphis, from school hallways, from financial aid offices, and corporate conference rooms, and every other place she had ever walked into, wearing the wrong combination of features to be taken at face value. Fear. Not of Marisela. Fear of what was coming through the door. Marisela turned away from her. She turned back toward the center of the ballroom, toward the grand entrance at the far end with its double doors and its marble arch and its elaborate floral arrangements that she now understood, with a certainty that settled through her like something warm, had been put there by someone who knew exactly what flowers she preferred. She was still soaked in wine. Her dress was ruined. She had been mocked and photographed and nearly thrown out by strangers. Her hands had shaken, and she had pressed them together so no one would see. And she had stood in the center of all of it, and not given anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. She straightened her spine. She set her chin. And she waited for the grand ballroom doors to open. The doors didn't open right away. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. The waiting. The 10, maybe 15 seconds between the guard's announcement and whatever came next, where the ballroom held itself in a suspension that felt almost physical, like the air itself had gotten thick and nobody wanted to be the first to breathe through it. Marisela felt it. She felt the room recalibrate around her in real time, felt the shift the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, not Not with your eyes or your ears, but somewhere lower, in the chest, in the place where your body processes things before your mind gets around to naming them. The guests who had been laughing 3 minutes ago were not laughing now. The ones who had been recording had lowered their phones by degrees, the way you lower something when you're not sure anymore whether the footage you're getting is the kind you want to be associated with. Soo-yeon Kwon had not moved. That was the interesting thing. Most people, when the social weather changes that fast, make some kind of adjustment. A step back, a slight repositioning, the small physical language of a person putting distance between themselves and a decision. Soo-yeon did none of that. She stood exactly where she'd been standing, her posture unchanged, her chin at its usual angle, and she watched the entrance doors with an expression that Marisela could not fully read from the side. Something between calculation and refusal. The face of a woman running numbers on a situation she did not yet believe had turned against her. Min Jun-cha, standing at her right side, had gone the color of old wax. He knew something she didn't, Marisela thought, or he knew the same thing she did and was processing it faster, with less resistance, because he didn't have as much pride invested in a particular outcome. His hand had found Soo-yeon's elbow, not affectionately, not reassuringly, but with the grip of a man who had looked at an exit and was performing the math on whether he could reach it without being noticed. The string quartet had stopped again. No one had told them to. They'd just stopped, the way all the room's ambient sounds had stopped, settling into that collective held breath. Then the doors opened, and Dante Viscari walked in. Marisela had spent 2 years watching people react to her husband in real time, and it never stopped being instructive. There was a particular quality to the way a room received him. Not like Celebrity, which was loud and forward-leaning, people pressing toward the source of it. This was the opposite. People pulled back. Not rudely, not obviously, but measurably, the way iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet, whether they intend to or not. He entered a space and the space reorganized around him, quietly and without being asked. He was not a large man. That was always the thing people got wrong in their heads before they met him. They expected size, expected some physical enormity to account for the weight he carried in a room. He was 6 feet, lean, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that had probably been handsome in a conventional way 20 years ago and was now something more complicated and more permanent. He wore a black suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, which on anyone else would have read as underdressed, and on Dante read as a statement about whose standards applied here. He had 4 men with him. They came in through the doors behind him and fanned out with the practiced, wordless efficiency of people who had done this so many times, it had stopped requiring thought. They didn't draw attention. They simply positioned themselves, and once they were positioned, the exits of the ballroom were no longer uncomplicated. Dante's eyes found her in approximately 4 seconds. She knew he'd been looking since the moment he walked through the door. Scanning, cataloging, the same way she'd been doing all evening. The habit of a man who had survived in rooms far more dangerous than this one by never walking into any space without first understanding what was in it. But his face didn't change when his eyes landed on her. He didn't react visibly. He simply saw her, and having seen her, began to move. He crossed the ballroom floor in the silence that had grown up to meet him, and nobody spoke, and nobody moved to intercept him, and nobody, not the event manager, not the security guards, not Soo-yeon Kwon with all the weight of her father's name, put themselves between him and his wife. He stopped in front of her. Close. The way he always stopped. Slightly too close for professional distance because he had never been interested in professional distance with her. He looked at the gown, at the wine stain spreading dark and ugly across the silk from her chest to her hips, at the wet glitter of the diamond necklace he had clasped with his own hands an hour ago. He looked at all of it with an attention that was quiet and total, the way surgeons look at something they're about to have to address. Then he looked at her face. "Are you hurt?" he said. Just that. Not what happened or who did this or are you all right, which was what most people would have asked, with that reflexive cushioning that turns a real question into a social gesture. He asked the specific thing he needed to know in the specific words that meant he wanted a specific answer. "No," she said. He held her eyes for a moment, reading her the way he read everything, not intrusively, but thoroughly, taking in what she was telling him and what she wasn't, and what the difference between those things meant. She had never in 2 years managed to lie to him successfully, not because he interrogated her, but because he paid the kind of attention that made lying feel structurally unsound. Whatever he found in her face, it was enough. He turned. "Would someone explain," he said, to the room at large, his voice carrying without effort, without volume, the way certain voices fill a space by weight rather than by sound, "why my wife is standing in the middle of her own birthday party covered in wine?" The question fell into the silence of the ballroom and lay there. Marisela watched it land on people, watched the comprehension travel, saw the moment it arrived on each face, the sequential revelation of what the room actually was, what the evening actually was, what the flowers and the music and the extravagance had been for. She watched it arrive on Ji-hye Park's face and saw the event coordinator's professional composure crack down the middle. She watched it arrive on the faces of the guests who had recorded it on their phones and saw those phones lower as though they'd suddenly gotten heavy. She watched it arrive on the faces of the people who had laughed, and some of them went pale, and some of them looked at the floor. She watched it arrive on Soo-yeon Kwan's face, and that she watched with everything she had, because it was the most honest thing she had seen from Soo-yeon all evening, the exact moment a person discovers they have made a catastrophic error and must decide in real time how to contain it. Soo-yeon's mouth opened, then it closed, then it opened again, and what came out was not an apology. Not yet, not quite. Not from a woman whose whole identity was built on the premise that she did not apologize to people, but something in the register adjacent to it, stripped of its upper layers, just the raw material underneath. "I didn't. We didn't know." "That's interesting," Dante said. He had turned to face her now, and his expression was the same it had been since he walked in, composed, cool, attentive, the face of a man who found the world perpetually less surprising than it found him. "Because I'd like to understand exactly what you did know." Something happened in Soo-yeon's posture. A subtle collapse, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching for it. A drop of maybe 2 centimeters in her shoulders, a slight forward inclination that her body made involuntarily before she caught it and corrected. "There was a misunderstanding," she said. "There was a woman standing alone in a room that I filled with flowers for her," Dante said, "and someone poured wine on her dress." The words were simple. The delivery was simple. The temperature in them was not. Min-jun-cha stepped forward. Marisela didn't know if it was bravery or stupidity or the specific brand of recklessness that comes from a man who has never truly faced a consequence and therefore doesn't have a calibrated sense of what one feels like approaching. He stepped forward, and he straightened and he said, "It was an accident." Dante looked at him, just looked at him, no expression change. Just the transfer of his full attention, which turned out to be, in the absence of any discernible emotion, more frightening than anger. "An accident," he said. "The glass slipped. It happens. In the direction of my wife specifically. It was crowded. People moved. These things." "Tell me your name," Dante said. Min-jun blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your name. Tell me your name." A beat. Min-jun Cha. Of the Cha Logistics family. It wasn't a question. Min-jun hesitated, then said, "Yes." Dante nodded slowly, with the air of a man writing something down in a place where it would not be forgotten. He didn't say anything else to Min-jun. He simply turned away, which was, it turned out, its own kind of sentence. He turned to one of the 4 men who had come in with him, a compact, gray-haired man named Ferry, who had been with Dante for 15 years and who, Marisela had come to understand, functioned as a kind of living external hard drive for information. Dante didn't want to carry visibly. They spoke quietly, too quietly for anyone else to hear, and Ferry nodded once and stepped away toward the corner of the room with his phone already out. Then Dante turned back to his wife. And here was the moment. The one Marisela had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. The moment when the public face of the evening would give way to whatever was actually between them. The specific private language of a marriage that was still, 2 years in, being built word by word in the space between 2 people who had not expected to find each other at all. He cupped her face in both his hands. The gesture was brief, 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it was complete. His palms against her jaw, his thumbs at the edges of her cheekbones. And he looked at her with an expression she had no word for in English, and suspected didn't have one in Italian either, an expression that existed only in the territory between, "I'm sorry this happened," and I will not let anything else happen, and something else underneath both of those things that she had learned, slowly and imperfectly, to receive without deflecting. I should have been here, he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. You're here now, she said. His jaw moved. He nodded once, something settling in him, and then he stepped back and his face closed again into the version of itself that the room could see, and Marisela understood, not for the first time, that there were at least two Dantes, possibly more, and that she was one of the few people alive who had been given access to more than one of them. What happened next happened quickly, and also slowly, the way things do when their implications are large enough to require processing in pieces. Dante requested the hotel's security recordings. He did not ask. He stated it, standing at the edge of the dance floor, addressing Ji-Hai Park, who had by now achieved the expression of a woman in the middle of the worst professional night of her life, with the calm specificity of someone who understood that requests were for people who might be refused, and he was not currently operating in that category. Ji-Hai Park said yes before he finished the sentence. He requested the recordings from every camera that had captured the ballroom in the past 90 minutes. Then he requested the names and contact information of every guest currently in the room. Then he turned to Ferry, who had returned from the corner, and the two of them had a brief, quiet conversation, of which Marisela caught only fragments. A company name she didn't recognize, a number, a date, and she watched Ferry's expression during it, which was the face of a man carrying out arithmetic on human consequences. Su-Yeon watched all of this from where she stood, and the calculation in her face had grown desperate. She was still running numbers. Marisela could almost see it, the frantic internal accounting of a woman trying to find a version of the evening that she could survive, adding up apologies against damage, running projections on what her father's name could and couldn't cover. She stepped forward again. She stepped forward the way you step onto uncertain ice, testing, slow, one foot before committing the other. Mr. Vescari, she said, I want to express my sincere— Don't, Dante said. He said it without turning to look at her, which was somehow more final than if he had. He was looking at something on Ferry's phone. Not yet. I haven't decided what I want from you yet. Su-Yeon stopped, her mouth closed. Beside her, Min-Jun Cha did something that surprised Marisela. Surprised her genuinely, in a way that she would think about later when she was trying to understand the evening's full shape. He looked at Marisela, not at Dante, not at Su-Yeon, not at the security guards or the guests, or any of the other elements of the situation that were obviously more immediately relevant to his well-being. He looked at Marisela specifically, and his face had shed every layer of performance it had been carrying since she first saw him, and what was underneath was younger than she'd expected. He said quietly, and without the audience awareness that had shaped everything else he'd done tonight, I'm sorry. Marisela looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what that meant, coming from someone who had done what he'd done. She thought about whether it mattered and what sorry was worth, and whether a person could mean a thing in retrospect that they hadn't felt in the moment. She didn't answer him, not because she was being cruel, but because she genuinely didn't know what to say, and her mother had taught her that silence was better than a lie, even a kind one. Min-Jun looked away. Dante had turned now, and he was watching Marisela watch Min-Jun, and she felt him file that moment away with the same careful attention he filed everything. And she knew they would talk about it later in the hotel room, in the way they talked about things. Not systematically, not with an agenda, but in the sideways, gradual way of two people who had discovered that direct confrontation was less interesting to them than the longer, slower excavation of what they actually thought. But that was later. That was after. Right now, Ji-Hai Park was being handed something by one of the hotel's security staff. A tablet, Marisela thought, though she was too far away to see it clearly. And whatever was on it made the event coordinator stand very still for a moment before she walked it over to Dante with the deliberate, steady pace of someone delivering bad news that they are not personally responsible for, but feel personally implicated in. Dante looked at the screen. Marisela watched his face. Nothing changed on it. He handed the tablet to Ferry. He said something in Italian. Ferry looked at the screen and nodded and went back to his corner. Dante turned to the ballroom at large. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just a simple turn of his body, a recalibration of where his attention was pointing. And he said to the assembled guests who had spent the past 3 hours drinking his champagne and eating his food and laughing at his wife, I'm going to ask everyone to remain in the room for a short while longer. My staff will be speaking with a few of you individually. I apologize for the inconvenience. Nobody moved toward the exits. Nobody said a word. The man with silver hair, the one who had spoken up earlier, the only person in the room who had offered Marisela anything resembling a defense, was standing near the windows, still holding his whiskey. And when Dante's gaze crossed him, the older man gave a small nod. Dante returned it. Brief, precise, the acknowledgement of one person by another when they recognize each other without being introduced. Marisela filed that away too. Dante crossed back to her side. He stood close enough that she could smell the particular combination of cedar and something darker that she had come to think of as simply him, and she felt, in the complicated and unresolved way she felt most things about her husband, both entirely safe and entirely aware that safety, in Dante Vescari's orbit, was a conditional thing that operated according to rules she didn't always have access to. "How long were you standing here alone, what?" he said. "Since 7:48. He absorbed that. She could see him doing the math, could see the numberland and the calculation that followed it, the recalibration of what had happened in this room in the time between her arrival and his. "Who spoke to you first?" he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "The woman," Marisela said. She didn't gesture at Su Yan. She didn't need to. And then her fiancé. What did they say? She told him. Not all of it. Not the granular detail, not the particular texture of every moment, but the shape of it, the sequence, what was said, and by whom, and in what order, the way she always summarized things for him. Clear, linear, without editorializing, because he was better at interpretation than she was, and she had learned to give him clean data and let him work. He listened with his arms crossed and his eyes on the middle distance, the posture he took when he was processing something he was trying not to react to on the surface. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me your collarbone." She moved the necklace slightly, tilting her chin, and he looked at the skin where the wine had run, which was uninjured but faintly pink from the temperature of it. He touched it with 2 fingers. A brief, checking touch, clinical in its intention and somehow not in its effect. And then he dropped his hand. "All right," he said. That was all. "All right." But it landed with the weight of a much longer sentence. Ferry reappeared at his elbow. Another quiet exchange. This one was longer, 3, maybe 4 minutes, Ferry speaking low, and Dante listening with that total stillness he could produce on command, the stillness that made him impossible to read and therefore impossible to prepare for. At one point, Dante asked a question in Italian that made Ferry's eyebrows move fractionally, and Ferry answered, and Dante said something that wasn't a question. Ferry nodded and took out his phone. Su Yan had been watching this entire exchange with the focused desperation of someone trying to lip-read a conversation in a language they don't speak. She took a half step forward and said, "If I could just speak with you privately." Dante turned to her, and for the first time since entering the room, he gave her his full, direct attention. "In approximately 10 minutes, he said, my financial team in Milan is going to complete the cancellation of 3 contracts currently held between Vescari Holdings and Quan Group subsidiaries. The total contract value is $460 million. He paused. "Your father has been notified." The blood left Su Yan's face. Not gradually, fast. The way heat leaves a room when a door is opened in winter. Sudden, total, the temperature changing in a breath. "That's..." Her voice had lost its architecture. It came out stripped, unbuilt. "That's 460, Dante said. "Yes." "Those contracts took..." She stopped, started again. "My father spent 18 months. "I know how long your father spent," Dante said. "He mentioned it several times during negotiations. I was very proud of the timeline." Something was happening in Su Yan's throat. Marisela watched it. Watched the woman swallow against something that was trying to come up. Watched her composure dismantle itself in real time. The careful architecture of certainty she had maintained for the entire evening, collapsing inward with the specific quality of a structure that was built on the assumption that the ground beneath it was permanent. "Please," Su Yan said. It was a small word. Marisela had not expected to hear it from her. She wasn't sure Su Yan had expected to say it. "My father had nothing to do with..." "Your father raised you," Dante said simply. Su Yan flinched. It was slight, barely visible, but it was real, and it was the most human thing Marisela had seen from her. Min Junsha had gone very still at Suyan's side. He was looking at the floor, and whatever was happening in his face was private, turned inward, not for the room to see. Marisela noticed that he had moved slightly away from Suyan, half a step, maybe less, the way people drift from the epicenter of something before they've consciously decided to. She noticed that Suyan had not looked at him in several minutes. One of Dante's men, not Ferry, one of the others, a younger one who had been stationed near the far wall, crossed the room and murmured something. Dante listened and then looked up and across the ballroom with an expression that was briefly and entirely unguarded, something moving through it that was too fast for Marisela to name before it was gone. He turned to her. "I need you to do something for me," he said, "and I need you to trust me before I explain it." She looked at him. 2 years of learning that face, that specific combination of deliberateness and control, the small variations that separated routine from serious, from something I have not told you yet. She looked at him, and she found the third one, and it sat in her chest like a cold finger pressing. "What is it?" she said. "I need you to step back from this room," he said. "Not leave, just back, toward the windows, and stay there." "Dante." "Someone has just walked into the lobby," he said, and his voice had dropped to something that was technically still calm but was a different quality of calm than it had been, the kind of calm that is a performance rather than a condition. "Someone I was not expecting tonight, and I need to understand what he's doing here before he gets near you." Marisela felt the cold spread outward from her chest. "Who?" she said. He looked at her with the expression he wore when he was deciding how much to give her. Not the calculating look, but the specific one that was about protection, and whether protection in this moment meant information or its absence. "His name is Reinhardt," he said. "Victor Reinhardt. And he is the one person in Europe who would have had a reason to know about tonight." "A reason to—" She stopped. "Dante, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said quietly, "that this evening may not have been what either of us thought it was." The ballroom doors at the far end opened, and the man who walked through them was not what Marisela had been bracing for. Not large, not obviously threatening, not the physical embodiment of whatever word she had been about to put to her fear. He was slight, white-haired, wearing a suit of pale gray that made him look almost translucent under the chandeliers, with a face that was so deeply ordinary it became its own kind of unsettling. He looked, she thought, like a retired accountant, like someone's grandfather. He walked into the ballroom, and he looked at Dante, and he smiled the way someone smiles when they've arrived at the exact moment they plan to arrive at. "Dante," he said. His voice was accented. Central European, she thought, or something like it. "I heard there was a party." Dante had gone absolutely still beside her, the kind of still that wasn't calm, the kind of still that was what calm is made from, the ground-level matter of it, before it becomes anything else. She felt it in the air between them, the quality of his attention shifting from the room to this single man the way a compass settles. "Victor," he said, "I hope I'm not late." The old man's eyes moved from Dante to Marisela, and he looked at her with the wine-stained dress and the ruined silk and the diamond necklace, and he said pleasantly, as though commenting on the weather, "You must be the wife." "I am," Marisela said. "I've wanted to meet you," Victor Reinhardt said. "Dante speaks of you very rarely, which, with a man like Dante, means you are the thing he is most careful about." He said it like a compliment. She felt it like something else. "How did you know about tonight?" Dante said. "Quiet. Absolute." Victor looked at him with that same pleasant, neutral expression and said, "The same way I know about most things, Dante. Someone told me." "Who?" Victor's smile stayed. His eyes moved away from Dante and back to Marisela with an attention that had nothing warm in it and everything precise, the look of someone inventorying something they may need to use later. That, he said, is the question you should have asked before you arranged a surprise party for your wife in a hotel that 3 different people on your own payroll already knew about." The silence that followed was the deepest one the room had managed all evening. Marisela felt Dante go still beside her in a way that was different from before. Not the performance of stillness, not the professional variety, but something involuntary, the body's response to information that has just restructured the landscape. Someone on his payroll. She turned to look at him. She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the precise immobility of his expression, and she understood, with the particular clarity that comes at the end of a very long evening when the last thing you were bracing for arrives anyway, that the betrayal Victor Reinhardt was describing was not hypothetical. Someone close to Dante had told this man about tonight. Someone who had known the location, the timing, the guest list. Someone who had known that Marisela Brooks would be standing alone in this ballroom for 20 minutes before her husband arrived. She thought about the wine glass, the timing of it, the ease with which Su-Yan had escalated, the speed of it, the confidence, the way the whole evening had moved against her with an efficiency that she had attributed to cruelty and social momentum, but which now, in the changed light of what Victor Reinhardt had just said, felt like choreography. Marisela stood very still and let that understanding move through her completely, because half processing it would be worse than not processing it at all. She let it arrive in full, the weight of it, the specific shape of what it meant, and she breathed through it the way her mother had taught her, slow and all the way down, until her hands were steady and her mind had stopped spinning and she could see the room clearly again. Then she looked at Dante. He was already looking at her, not the way he'd looked at her when he walked in. That had been relief and anger braided together, arriving at the same time, pulling in opposite directions. This was different. This was the look of a man who had just watched his wife receive information that he had not yet fully processed himself, and was trying to determine how much of what she was thinking matched what he was thinking, and whether the gap between those two things was going to cost him something. She held his gaze and said very quietly, "Who knew?" His jaw moved. "I'm working on that." "How many people knew about tonight?" Marisela, how many, Dante? A beat. 4, including Ferry. And you trust all 4? He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer, and she felt the shape of it press against something in her chest that she did not have time to examine right now. Victor Reinhardt had not moved from where he'd stopped near the entrance. He was watching the two of them with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who had come to a theater and was waiting for the performance to reach the part he'd paid for. One of Dante's men had positioned himself 6 feet from Victor, close enough to be a statement, far enough to maintain the pretense of civility. Victor appeared untroubled by this. Su-Yan and Min-jun were still standing near the center of the ballroom, but the geography between them had shifted. They were no longer adjacent in the way couples stand, sharing a common orientation toward the world. They were side by side the way strangers are side by side, their bodies angled slightly away from each other, a hairline fracture made visible in their positioning. Nobody else would have noticed. Marisela noticed. Ji-hye Park was on her earpiece again, her face the color of old paper, running the kind of damage control that no amount of professional training fully prepares you for. Dante turned away from Marisela and walked toward Victor with the deliberate, metered pace of a man who was allowing himself to close a distance at his own speed rather than the speed the situation was pulling him toward. He stopped 8 feet away. Not close. Close enough. "You're going to tell me who your source is," Dante said. Victor tilted his head slightly. "Am I?" "Yes." "That's a very confident position," Victor said pleasantly, "for a man standing in a room where his security has just been compromised." "My security," Dante said, "has not been compromised. One person made a phone call they shouldn't have made. That's a leak, not a compromise. One phone call was all it took to get me into this room." "You're not in my room, Victor. You're in a hotel ballroom. Those are different things." Victor smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been having this kind of conversation for 40 years and had long since stopped finding it tiring. "Your wife is wearing wine that someone else poured on her, in a room you filled with flowers, on her birthday." He paused. "I'd call that a compromise." Something moved in Dante's face. Fast. Too fast for most people to catch. Marisela caught it. "Who called you?" Dante said. The pleasantness was gone from his voice entirely now. Not replaced by anger, but replaced by something quieter and more total, the vocal equivalent of a room with all its furniture removed. "I think you already know," Victor said. "I want to hear you say it." Victor looked at him for a moment. Then his eyes moved, just briefly, a flicker of a glance, toward Ferry, who was standing near the far wall with his phone in his hand and his expression completely closed, and then back to Dante. And in the 2 seconds of silence that followed, Marisela watched Dante Vescari understand something. She watched it happen in his body before it happened in his face. A very small change in his posture, a fraction of an inch in his shoulders, a barely perceptible adjustment in the set of his jaw. The physical signature of a man absorbing a blow that he had not seen coming, which meant it was a blow that had come from somewhere he had not thought to guard. He didn't look at Ferry. That was the thing that hit her hardest, that he didn't look, because looking would have confirmed it, and for one more second he was choosing not to confirm it, choosing the last moment of a version of the world where Ferry was still what he had always been. 15 years of unbroken trust condensed into the simple fact of a man standing near a wall with his phone in his hand. Then Dante turned and looked at Ferry. Ferry met his eyes. And neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was so specific, so weighted with its own history, that it functioned as a complete conversation, question asked and answered in the space between one person's gaze and another's. Ferry looked away first. He looked at the floor. His right hand, the one holding the phone, lowered slightly, and his posture did the thing that bodies do when the performance is over and there's nothing left to hold in place. Dante said very quietly in Italian, "Quindici anni." 15 years. Ferry's throat moved. He didn't speak. Dante turned back to Victor. His face had closed completely. Not the professional composure from before. Not the strategic blankness, but something harder and more final, like a door being shut in a room that wasn't going to be used again. "What do you want?" he said. Not a question. An opening bid. "The Jiang contracts," Victor said. "No." "The distribution rights in the Southern Corridor and the Jiang contracts." "No." "Dante." Victor's voice acquired the first real edge Marisela had heard in it. Still controlled, still pleasant in its surface register, but something beneath that surface that was not pleasant at all. "You are standing in a room that I walked into without an invitation, past 4 of your best men, on the night of your wife's birthday party. I think we both understand what that means about the current state of our respective positions. It means you made a phone call to someone I trusted," Dante said, "and that person let you know where I was going to be. That's all it means, Victor. It doesn't mean anything else." "Your wife was left alone for 20 minutes, Victor said. 20 minutes in which a great many things could have happened, in which, fortunately for all of us, only a glass of wine happened." He let that land, let it sit for a beat. "I want you to understand that the wine was not my instruction." The ballroom was so quiet, Marisela could hear the ice shifting in an abandoned champagne bucket 12 feet to her left. "The wine was a coincidence?" Dante said. "The wine was Kwan's daughter making a poor decision in a room where she felt very safe," Victor said. "I had nothing to do with it. I want that understood." "What you want understood," Dante said, "is that you're drawing a line between what you did and what she did, so that what comes next can be calibrated accordingly." Victor inclined his head. "Precisely." "I don't honor that distinction," Dante said. "You put my wife in a room without me. Whatever happened to her in that room is yours." For the first time, something flickered in Victor Reinhardt's expression that was not entirely controlled. Not fear. She didn't think it was fear. More like the adjustment a chess player makes when the board has produced a move they considered but discounted. A recalibration. "That's an extreme position," he said. "It's my position," Dante said. "The Jiang contracts are not on the table." Dante's voice had not changed in volume or temperature. It had simply stopped accommodating the possibility of a counteroffer. "Nothing is on the table. You came here tonight to leverage my wife's presence against my business decisions, and I want you to understand clearly that you have achieved the opposite of your intended outcome." "Dante." "You've made it personal," Dante said. "You know what I'm like when things are personal." Victor was quiet. He was looking at Dante with an expression that was doing a great deal of work, processing, calculating, running contingencies. And for the first time since he'd walked through the door, Marisela thought he looked like a man who might have made an error. Then he looked at her. "Mrs. Vescari," he said, "I owe you an apology. For this evening and for my role in the conditions that created it." She looked at him steadily. "You owe me more than that," she said. "But I'll take the apology." Something crossed his face. Respect, maybe. Reluctant, the kind that comes from surprise. He gave her a small nod. She did not return it. I'll see myself out, he said. He looked at Dante one more time. We'll talk, Dante. The terms you don't want to discuss tonight will still exist tomorrow. Call ahead next time, Dante said. My wife doesn't like surprises. Victor smiled one more time, smaller, more honest than the others, and walked back toward the ballroom entrance the way he had arrived, unhurried and entirely without shame, a man who had played and lost a round and was filing it under temporary rather than final. One of Dante's men peeled off to follow him at a distance. Victor didn't acknowledge this. The doors closed. The ballroom breathed. Dante stood with his back to the room for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds of pure stillness, the kind that was costing him something to maintain. And then he turned around. He didn't go to Ferry immediately. He went to Marisela first, which was a choice she understood and felt simultaneously, the specific sequencing of a man who knew that what he was about to deal with was going to require everything he had, and who needed one moment of something solid before he spent it. He stood in front of her. He didn't touch her this time. Are you still all right? He said. I've been better, she said. I've also been worse. His mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not one. That's true. Ferry, she said. His expression settled. Yes. 15 years. Yes. She looked at him. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it entirely, because whatever else this evening had contained, she understood what it cost a man like Dante Viscari to be wrong about the loyalty of someone he had trusted for 15 years, and that cost was not nothing, and she was not going to pretend it was. He nodded once. Go stand with Thomas, he said, nodding toward the man in the steel-gray suit, the older man, the one with the whiskey, the one who had spoken up for her. I trust him. He'll stay with you. Dante, I need to deal with Ferry, he said, and the word deal was flat and final and did not invite expansion. And I need to deal with Su Yan's father, who has apparently just arrived in the lobby, because nothing about this evening is simple. And I need to do both of those things knowing you're standing somewhere I don't have to worry about. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, All right. She crossed the ballroom toward the man with silver hair, who watched her coming with the quiet attention of someone who had been waiting to be useful and was prepared to do it without making a production of it. He had put his whiskey glass down somewhere along the way. Thomas Avery, he said when she reached him. He didn't extend his hand. He read the moment correctly, understood that she wasn't interested in pleasantries, and simply positioned himself at her side in the way of someone who has done protective work before, and understands that the point is presence, not performance. I know your husband from a long time ago. Thank you, Marisela said, for earlier. I told the truth, he said. That's all. She nodded. She turned to watch the room. Dante had crossed to where Ferry was standing. The distance between them was the same as it had been all evening, familiar, working close, but everything inside that distance had changed, and the change was visible if you knew how to look for it, in the careful way Dante held his own body, the controlled restraint of a man who had made a decision about how to do something very difficult and was holding himself to that decision by force of will. He spoke to Ferry quietly. She could not hear the words, but she could read the shape of the conversation, see Ferry answer, see Dante listen, see Ferry's hands move once in what might have been explanation or might have been the residue of a plea, and see Dante go still when that happened, the stillness that meant the answer had been given and received and the accounting was complete. 2 of Dante's men moved to stand on either side of Ferry. Ferry didn't resist. He stood between them and he looked at the floor and he looked like what he was, a man at the end of something, standing in the rubble of a decision that had probably seemed smaller when he was making it. Marisela watched this and felt something complicated and unresolved moving through her chest, the way complicated things always move through her. Not cleanly, not simply, not with the neat narrative arc of a lesson being completed. Just as itself, messy and human and refusing to resolve into something easier. Across the room, the ballroom doors opened again. This time, it was not someone who walked in quietly. Chairman Kwon Hyung-jae entered the way men of his particular category enter spaces. With the slightly too large footstep, the chin at the angle of someone who has never had to adjust it for a room, flanked by 2 assistants who moved with the practiced invisibility of people whose job it was to be useful without being seen. He was a tall man in his late 60s, with white hair and the compact, contained energy of someone who had spent his life making decisions that other people had to execute and had long since stopped distinguishing between the two activities. He wore a charcoal suit and gold cufflinks, and an expression that had started the evening as social authority and had been, Marisela could see it from across the room, recently disturbed by something he had received on his phone. He saw his daughter first. Su-Yan had been watching the door. When her father walked through it, she moved toward him with a speed that contained something Marisela recognized. The specific urgency of a grown adult child needing to reach a parent before someone else defines the situation for them. She got halfway across the floor before the chairman's eyes moved from her face to the man standing in the center of the room, and Dante Viscari and Chairman Kwan looked at each other across 30 feet of marble floor, and Su-Yan stopped where she was. The chairman walked toward Dante. Su-Yan fell in behind him, adjusting her trajectory, her earlier urgency converting into the contained positioning of someone who has surrendered the narrative and is trying to manage proximity instead. "Mr. Viscari," the chairman said. His English was precise, with the measured weight of a man who had spent decades speaking in rooms where his words were being translated in real time and had learned to speak with no waste in them. "I was informed of a contract cancellation 30 minutes ago." "You were," Dante said. $460 million. "That's correct?" The chairman looked at him for a moment. Then his eyes moved to Marisela, standing near the windows with Thomas Avery at her side, in her ruined birthday dress, the diamond necklace still at her throat. He looked at her the way men of his generation and category look at situations they need to assess, completely, without pretending they aren't looking. Then he looked back at Dante. "My daughter," he said. "Yes," Dante said. The chairman was quiet. Whatever had been in his phone notification 30 minutes ago had clearly contained enough information that he was not requiring a detailed summary. His face had the quality of a man doing the math on a problem that has more variables than he was expecting and is unwilling to let that show. "What would it take," he said, "to reconsider the cancellation?" "Nothing that your daughter or her fiancé can offer," Dante said, "and nothing that you can offer tonight." He paused. "There may be a conversation to be had at a different time, in a different room, about whether the business relationship between our families can survive this evening. That conversation is not tonight. Tonight my daughter made a mistake. Your daughter orchestrated the public humiliation of my wife on her birthday," Dante said, and his voice had not changed, but the chairman stopped speaking mid-sentence and Su-Yan, standing 2 feet behind him, went very still. "With help from her fiancé, who made it physical, in a room full of cameras." "I understand that," the chairman said, "and I don't need you to tell me you understand it. I need you to understand the consequence of it, which you are currently experiencing." Dante looked at him steadily. "The contracts are canceled. That is done. Whether there is a future between our organizations depends on conversations that begin with your daughter's direct apology to my wife, not to me and not to you. That's the starting point. Everything after that is conditional." The chairman absorbed this. His jaw moved. I was a man accustomed to being the one who set the terms, and the adjustment required to receive terms from someone else was costing him something. She could see it, the fine tension in his face, the slight compression of his mouth. He turned to his daughter. He said something in Korean, short, flat, stripped of the parental softness that would have made it easier for Su-Yan to hear. Su-Yan looked at her father for a moment. Marisela watched her face, watched the complicated inheritance of it, the daughter who had grown up in the orbit of enormous power and had learned to replicate it, who had walked into this ballroom tonight wrapped in the certainty of her own untouchability and was now standing in the rubble of that certainty, with her father looking at her in a way that had no mercy in it. She turned to Marisela. She crossed the floor. She stopped 3 feet away, which was the closest she had stood to Marisela all evening without hostility occupying the space between them, and for a moment she was just a woman. 30-something, silk gown, the careful architecture of her face beginning to come apart at its seams. Standing in front of another woman she had done a terrible thing to. "I owe you an apology," Su-Yan said. Her voice was controlled. It cost her to keep it that way. Marisela could see the cost. "What I did tonight, what I allowed to happen, what I arranged to happen, was inexcusable." Marisela looked at her. "I told myself it was something else," Su-Yan continued. "I told myself I was protecting the event, protecting my family's interests, protecting... She stopped. She looked away for a fraction of a second, and when she looked back, the fraction was still in her face, the unguarded remnant of it. I was wrong. I was cruel, and I'm sorry. The room was very quiet. Marisela thought about what her mother would say. She thought about the difference between accepting an apology and forgiving it, which her mother had always insisted were different activities requiring different amounts of time. She thought about what it cost a woman like Su Yan to stand here and say this in front of her father and her fiancé and 60 witnesses, and a man she had tried to antagonize and failed. She said, "I hear you. Not I forgive you. Not it's all right." Those things would have been untrue, and she was not in the habit of offering people the comfort of untrue things. "I hear you." Which meant, the apology has been received. What is done with it is a separate matter, and that is mine to determine, not yours. Su-Yan nodded. She stepped back. Min Juncha had been watching from where he stood, and when Su-Yan returned to her father's side, he didn't follow her. He stayed where he was, slightly off-center from the group, slightly removed from everything, and Marisela thought he was beginning to understand something. Not about tonight, but about the whole structure of his life. The foundations he had assumed were solid, the permanence of certain arrangements that were apparently less permanent than he had thought. That, she reflected, was going to take longer than one evening to process. Dante crossed to her side. He arrived the way he always arrived, without announcement, without theater, simply present when he hadn't been a moment before. He looked at her face, and whatever he found in it settled something in him that had been unsettled. "Su-Yan's father wants to speak with me privately," he said quietly. "About the contracts. It will take about 20 minutes. "All right," she said. "Thomas will stay with you." "I know." He looked at the wine stain on her dress, at the diamond necklace, at her face, which was doing the thing it did when she was working through something she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. "What are you thinking?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm thinking about what you said, about it being personal now." "And?" "I'm thinking about what that means for Victor Reinhardt," she said, "and what you're planning to do." He held her gaze. "I'm going to dismantle everything he has in the Southern Corridor," he said, with the calm specificity of a man discussing a plan he has already finished making. "Every distribution channel, every partnership, every relationship he spent the last 7 years building. I'm going to do it methodically and legally, and in a way that takes approximately 18 months and leaves nothing behind." She took that in. "That's a long time to be angry," she said. "It's not anger," he said. "It's math." She almost smiled. Almost. "And Ferry," she said. Something moved in his face. He said, "That's mine to carry." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to share it. I'm asking you if you're all right." He looked at her for a long moment. The specific, careful look of a man who had spent most of his life in rooms where that question was not asked, where the honest answer to it was not something you were expected to produce, where all right was a performance rather than a condition. He said, "Not yet." She nodded. "Okay," she said. He reached out and touched her jaw. That brief, specific gesture again, 2 or 3 seconds, the way he had when he first walked in. And then he turned and went with the chairman toward the private room that Ji Hye Park was opening at the far end of the ballroom, his back straight and his pace even and nothing in his bearing suggesting that the last 2 hours had dented anything. She knew better. Thomas Avery appeared at her shoulder with a fresh glass of sparkling water, which he offered without comment. She took it. "Interesting man, your husband," he said. "Yes," she said. "Known him a long time," Thomas said. "Never saw him walk across a room that fast before." She looked at him. "When he came in," Thomas said. "When he saw you standing there. That was the fastest I've ever seen Dante Viscari move toward anything." Marisela held the glass of water and felt the evening settling around her in layers, the wine drying slowly in the silk of her dress, the chandeliers still throwing their extravagant light across the room, the guests who remained drifting in uncomfortable clusters, uncertain whether to leave or stay, aware that they were witnesses to something whose full shape they hadn't yet been given permission to understand. The flowers were still everywhere, white roses in their impossible towers. She looked at them and thought about the 6 weeks her seamstress had spent on this dress, about the diamond necklace clasped by someone else's hands, at the mirror in the hotel room, about the first time she'd said yes, the third time he'd asked, standing in the entry of her accountant's office in Chicago in January, snow coming sideways against the windows, him in his coat with his car keys in his hand, and that look on his face, the one she'd never found a word for. She thought about how her mother would have said something very practical about this evening, something that would have been right and would have also been insufficient, the way practical things always were when the situation had grown large enough to exceed the practical. She thought about Ferry, 15 years, the specific weight of that. She thought about Victor Reinhardt, walking out through those doors with his pleasant smile and his gray suit, already running the calculation on what came next. She took a slow breath, set her shoulders. She was still standing in the room, still here, still upright, still wearing the ruined dress and the diamond necklace, still carrying the evening in her body the way you carry something heavy. The tension of it in her lower back, the dull throb at her temples, the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from the sustained effort of maintaining yourself in a room that was trying to take you apart. Still here. Across the ballroom, the door to the private room had closed behind Dante and the chairman. Su-Yan was standing with two of her father's assistants near the far wall, her arms wrapped around herself in the unconscious posture of a woman who has been cold for longer than she realized. Min-Jun Cha was standing completely alone near the center of the room, and he was looking at his phone, and whatever he was reading on it had drained the last color from his face, because the Cha family's largest contract, the one Dante had instructed Ferry to begin the cancellation procedures on 40 minutes ago, before they knew what Ferry was, had just sent its termination notice, and the number attached to it was the kind of number that ends things. Thomas Avery, beside Marisela, said nothing. He simply stood where he was and drank the last of his whiskey and watched the room with the patient attention of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by what rooms contained. The string quartet, tentatively, began to play again. It was a slow piece, something European and understated, the kind of music that was designed to fill a space without demanding anything from it. It drifted up into the chandeliers and spread out across the tables with their champagne silk cloths and their untouched place settings and their centerpieces of white roses that Dante had chosen because white was what she always chose, given the option. Marisela listened to the music. She was still listening when the door to the private room opened and Dante came back out, and from across the ballroom his eyes found her immediately, instantly, without searching, the way they always did. And she thought again about what Thomas Avery had said. Fastest I've ever seen Dante Viscari move toward anything. And he walked back across the floor toward her, and his face was carrying something new in it, something that had not been there before he went into that room. He stopped in front of her. "The chairman has agreed," he said, "to the terms." "What terms?" "The ones I gave him," he said. "His daughter's apology to you, which she has made. Public acknowledgement from the Kwan Group of what happened tonight, which will be issued tomorrow morning through their communications office. And one other thing." "What other thing?" He looked at her with that expression, the one she didn't have a word for, the one that lived in the territory between protection and something older and more fundamental. And he said, "He's agreed to let me decide how tonight ends." She looked at him. "And how does tonight end?" He took her hand. His fingers were warm and completely steady, the hands of a man who had made his decisions and was finished making them. "However you want it to," he said. She stood in the middle of the ballroom her husband had filled with white roses, in the dress that a woman in Bronzeville had spent 6 weeks building stitch by careful stitch, soaked in wine from the collar to the hem, with the diamonds at her throat catching the light of chandeliers that had been turned to exactly the right warmth, because someone who paid attention had specified it, and she felt the full weight of the evening pressing down on her, and also, underneath it, separate from it, quieter and more permanent, something that had been with her the whole time and had not left. She had not left. That was the thing. Through all of it, the laughter and the wine and the cameras and the guards and Victor Reinhardt and Ferry and the chairman and the apology that was not forgiveness and the apology that was not forgiven. She had not left the room. She had stood in the center of it, and she had breathed, and she had kept her hands still, and she had waited. And she was still here. "I want my birthday back," she said. Dante looked at her. Then he did something she had seen him do perhaps 6 times in 2 years. He smiled. Not the controlled, strategic expression he offered most rooms. The real one. The one that arrived without being managed, that reached his eyes and changed the whole structure of his face into something younger and less careful. "Then that's what you'll have," he said. He turned to the room, to the guests who remained, the staff, Ji-hae Park with her earpiece and her clipboard and her thoroughly destroyed evening, the string quartet that had managed to keep playing through everything. And he spoke in a clear voice that carried without effort to every corner of the space. "My wife's birthday dinner will begin in 30 minutes. The guest list has been revised. If you have been asked to stay, you're welcome. If you haven't been contacted by my staff in the next 5 minutes, you are not." He looked at Soo-yeon, at Min-jun, at the remaining clusters of guests who had laughed, who had filmed, who had pressed toward the spectacle with their champagne flutes and their phones. "The evening is being reset," he said simply. "Some of you are part of what comes next. The rest of you know what you did tonight, and so do I, and so will everyone who matters to you by morning." He turned back to Marisela. He offered his arm. She took it. And the string quartet, responding to some signal she hadn't seen given, shifted into something warmer and more deliberate. A melody with intention behind it, music that knew what it was for, and the chandeliers adjusted almost imperceptibly to a softer register, and Ji-hae Park, with the expression of a woman who had survived something and wasn't entirely sure yet what she'd survive next, began directing the remaining staff toward the dinner tables with the quiet, purposeful efficiency of someone who had decided that the best thing she could do now was make the rest of this evening beautiful. Marisela walked beside her husband across the marble floor of the ballroom he had filled with white roses, in her ruined dress, with the diamonds at her throat, and she breathed all the way down into the bottom of her lungs, and her hands were steady, and her chin was level, and the night that had tried to take everything from her had not managed to take it after all. The dinner that followed was not what anyone had expected when they arrived at the Grand Vesper Hotel that evening. Not the guests who remained, 12 people, carefully chosen, who had either done nothing wrong or done the one right thing in a room where wrong had been the easier option. Not Ji-hae Park, who had reconfigured the evening's entire service structure in 22 minutes with the focused, slightly desperate efficiency of someone converting a catastrophe into a credential. Not Marisela herself, who had arrived at this table in a wine-stained dress because changing felt like surrendering something she wasn't ready to surrender, and who sat now at the center of it all with a glass of water in her hand and the strange, disorienting awareness of a person who has walked through something and arrived, improbably, at the other side. The table was long and white and covered in the same white roses that filled the rest of the room. Someone, Ji-hae, probably, in those 22 minutes, had placed candles at intervals down its length, and in the candlelight the wine stain on Marisela's dress looked almost intentional, like something a designer might have done on purpose, like color placed with meaning. She thought about that. Then she stopped thinking about it and ate the soup that had been put in front of her, because she had not eaten since a small meal on the plane that morning, and her body had opinions about that which she had been ignoring for several hours. Dante sat at her left. He ate with the economy of a man who treats food as maintenance rather than pleasure, which was something she had tried, with moderate success, to change in him over 2 years. He ate his soup. He watched the table. He watched her, intermittently, with a quality of attention that had shifted from the controlled professional alertness of earlier in the evening to something quieter and more private, the attention of a man who has finished dealing with a crisis and is now sitting with its residue. Thomas Avery was at the table. I was 3 seats down on the opposite side, talking with a Korean businessman whom Marisela didn't know, but who had apparently been vouched for by Thomas. And he ate with the uncomplicated appetite of a man who had long since decided that meals were one of life's reliable pleasures, and saw no reason to let a difficult evening interfere with that. The other guests were people she had not met, most of them, their names and faces arriving in the fog of an evening that had used up a great deal of her processing capacity. They were quiet, all of them, in the particular subdued register of people who have witnessed something and are still sorting out what they witnessed and what it means about them that they were there to see it. Outside the ballroom windows, Seoul pulsed in the dark. 30 floors below, indifferent and luminous, the city going about the 10,000 businesses of its evening without any awareness of what had happened in this room or what it had cost. Marisela looked at those lights for a long time. Then she put down her soup spoon and turned to Dante and said, quietly enough that the table's conversation covered it, "Tell me about Fairy." He looked at her. He had been expecting this, she could see that, had been waiting for the moment when the immediate crisis had receded enough that there was space for the harder conversation, the one that wasn't about Su Yan or Victor Reinhardt or Chairman Kwan or contracts or security footage, but about a man who had sat at tables like this one for 15 years and had made, at some point, and for reasons not yet fully clear, a phone call he should not have made. "What do you want to know?" Dante said. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his water glass a quarter turn on the tablecloth, the small, habitual motion he made when he was choosing words carefully. "Money," he said. "That's what he told me. Victor offered him a number that was—" He paused. "Significant, and he took it." "That's it?" she said. "That's what he said." She looked at him. "Do you believe him?" Dante was quiet for a beat longer than the question required. "No," he said. "What do you think it was?" He turned the glass again. "I think he was tired," he said. "I think 15 years of my life is a long time to carry, and I think at some point the weight of it became a different thing than loyalty. And I think when Victor found him and offered him a way to set it down, he took it." He stopped. "That's not a defense of what he did. It's just what I think it was." She listened to him say it. She heard the specific quality of his voice saying it, not absolved, not forgiving, but honest. The way Dante was honest about the things he had actually examined rather than the things he preferred to believe. "Where is he now?" she said. "Downstairs," Dante said. "In a room, with 2 of my men." "What happens to him?" Dante looked at her. "He'll be removed from my organization. His accounts will be audited. The amount Victor paid him will be recovered." He paused. "He won't be harmed." She held his gaze. "Is that the truth?" "Yes," he said. And she believed him, not because she was naive about what her husband was capable of, but because she had learned, in 2 years of close proximity, to read the difference between what Dante said because it was convenient and what he said because it was accurate, and this was the second kind. "All right," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You're not going to ask me for more?" "I'm going to ask you something else," she said. "Later, not here." He nodded. The conversation closed, and they returned to the table and the food and the careful recovering quiet of the evening, and the candles burned down by degrees, and the city outside the windows kept its 10,000 businesses going without them. It was 11:40 when the dinner ended. The guests left with the particular subdued courtesy of people who understood, without being told, that the appropriate register for their departure was quiet and undemanding. No effusive thank yous, no prolonged goodbyes, just the honest acknowledgement of a difficult evening and the decent instinct to take up as little space as possible on the way out of it. Thomas Avery was the last to leave. He stopped at Marisela's chair and looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated regard of a man who had no investment in managing her impression of him. "You handled tonight well," he said. "I stood still," she said. "That's all I did." "That's the whole thing," he said. "Most people can't do it." He paused. "I knew a woman once who stood still in a room that was trying to push her out. Stood there for 2 hours. Room eventually decided she was right, and it was wrong." He looked at the wine stain on her dress. "Rooms figure it out eventually. Takes them longer than it should." "Did she forgive the room?" Marisela asked. Thomas considered this. "She didn't feel the need to," he said. "She was too busy being right." He looked at Dante. "Your wife is something, Vescari." "I know," Dante said. Thomas nodded at them both and left. The ballroom emptied. Jai Hai Park oversaw the staff with the focused, slightly hollow energy of someone running on professional autopilot, directing the clearing of tables and the extinguishing of candles, and the systematic dismantling of an evening that had gone as wrong as an evening can go before, improbably, correcting course. She caught Marisela's eye once, across the diminishing space of the room, and gave her a look that was not quite an apology and not quite an acknowledgement, but was something real, something that existed in the specific frequency between those two things, and Marisela returned it with a small nod that meant she had received it, and that was all. When the room had cleared to the staff and the fading evidence of white roses and candle wax and spilled champagne, Dante took Marisela's hand and walked her out. Not through the lobby, through a service corridor that Jihye Park had quietly indicated, bypassing the grand entrance and the valets and the potential remainder of anyone who had been there earlier and might still be in the building's orbit. Through a shorter, plainer route that arrived at the elevator bank with the quiet efficiency of a man who had, apparently, familiarized himself with the hotel's floor plan before tonight, which was the kind of thing Dante did as a matter of course, and which she had long since stopped finding either surprising or unsettling. The elevator was empty, the doors closed. The city dropped away below them as they rose. She looked at their reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. She looked at the dress, the damage to it, the dried wine spread across the silk like a shadow of the evening, dark at the center and lighter at the edges, the necklace still catching light even now. She looked at her own face, which was tired in a way that showed around the eyes and at the corners of her mouth, the specific exhaustion of sustained composure finally relaxing its grip. She looked at Dante's reflection. He was watching hers. "You knew it was a surprise party," she said. "I organized it," he said. "Before that." She turned to look at him directly rather than in the mirror. "You knew when you left the room tonight that it was a surprise. You knew I was going to walk into that ballroom alone and find people I didn't know, and you were going to arrive after me, and the whole point was the reveal." She paused. "That's why you texted what you texted. You'll know me when you see me. You were being theatrical." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "So the 20 minutes I spent alone in that room were not supposed to happen that way," he said. "I was supposed to be 5 minutes behind you. I was delayed by a call that I should have let go to voicemail." "From Victor's people?" "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm going to find out." "So he may have arranged the delay." "Possibly." She absorbed this. The elevator moved. She looked at the floor numbers above the door, counting upward. "You put me in that room without backup," she said. Not accusatory, just true. "Yes," he said. And nothing else, because Dante did not offer explanations as a substitute for accountability, which was one of the things she had learned about him that she respected and also found, on certain evenings, profoundly irritating. "I'm not asking you to apologize," she said. "I know. I'm asking you to understand what that was like." He turned toward her fully. I was looking at her the way he had in the ballroom, total, specific, the look that saw more than she sometimes intended to show. "I know what it was like," he said. "I watched the security footage from the lobby camera before I came in. I watched you walk in. I watched you scan the room for me and not find me. I watched the first 10 minutes of you managing a room that was deciding it didn't want you in it." He paused. "And I walked in knowing all of that, which is why I moved the way I did." She thought about Thomas Avery's voice. Fastest I've ever seen Dante Viscari move toward anything. She let out a long breath. She turned back to the elevator doors and watched the floor numbers, and she said, "The question I told you I'd ask later." "Yes?" "Who are you exactly?" She said it quietly, without drama. "Not the surface of it. Not what I know and what I've seen and what I've been told, but the full version, the Victor Reinhardt version, the fairy version." She paused. "The version of you that existed before you walked into my office in January and decided you wanted to have dinner with me." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto their floor. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Dante reached out and held the door open with one hand and said, "Come inside and I'll tell you." She looked at him. "All of it," he said. "What you're asking for. I'll tell you all of it." She held his gaze. "Tonight?" "Tonight," he said. "If that's what you want." She thought about what her mother would say. She thought about the difference between knowing a thing and being ready for it, and whether those two states were required to arrive simultaneously, or whether you could be unready and know it anyway and decide to receive it regardless. "Yes," she said. "That's what I want." They went inside. The suite was large and quiet, with the particular contained luxury of a room that has been waiting in patience, undisturbed, while the rest of the evening unraveled and reassembled elsewhere. Someone from the hotel staff, Ji-Hai Park probably, or at her direction, had arranged a small tray of things on the coffee table. Tea, a plate of the particular small honey cakes that Marisela had mentioned to Dante once. In passing, in a conversation she had half forgotten, that her mother used to make on the last Sunday of every month. She looked at those cakes for a moment and felt something move through her chest that was too complicated and too private to name. She went into the bathroom and changed out of the ruined dress. She folded it carefully, not because it could be saved, but because it had been made by someone's hands and deserved to be folded, and set it on the edge of the tub. She unclasped the diamond necklace and held it in her palm for a moment, the familiar cold weight of it, and then set it on the vanity. She put on the hotel robe and went back out. Dante had taken off his jacket and was sitting on the couch with the tea things between them, still in his shirt and his dark trousers, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had set it down somewhere slightly out of reach and was not yet sure whether to retrieve it. She sat across from him. She poured 2 cups of tea, because someone had to do it, and it was something to do with her hands, and she set one in front of him and wrapped both hands around the other and looked at him across the quiet room and waited. He talked for a long time, not the way people talk when they have rehearsed what they want to say, not smoothly, not in order, not with the clean connective tissue of a prepared account. He talked the way people talk when they have not said something in a very long time, and the act of saying it requires the simultaneous excavation and construction of the language for it. He stopped and started. He circled back to things. He said certain things twice, from different angles, as though needing to be sure she had received them correctly. She listened. She asked very few questions. She had learned in 2 years of this man that the questions that mattered were not the ones you asked out loud, but the ones you held in your body while someone was speaking, the ones that shaped the quality of your listening, and that the most important thing she could do right now was listen in the way that let him know she was still there at the end of each sentence, that she had received what was said and had not left. He told her about how he had come into his father's business at 22 without fully understanding what he was entering, and how by the time he understood it fully, he was already inside it in a way that had no clean exit. He told her about the decisions he had made at 30 that had compounded into the architecture of his life at 47. He told her about Victor Reinhardt, not the encounter in the ballroom, but the history behind it, the decade-long running negotiation between 2 men who operated in the same territory and had never found a way to either cooperate or eliminate each other, circling like bodies with incompatible gravitational fields. He told her what his organization was, precisely, in terms she didn't try to simplify, and he didn't try to soften. He told her about his first marriage, which had lasted 3 years and ended not in cruelty, but in the quieter, more irreversible way that things end when 2 people have discovered they can only be what they are, and what they are is incompatible. He told her what it had felt like to walk into her office in January in the snow, which had not been something he was expecting. The specific, irritating, inconvenient surprise of finding someone interesting when you had arrived for a 40-minute consultation. He told her about Ferry, not just tonight, but Ferry at the beginning, Ferry at 32, the man he had been when Dante first met him, and the man he had become across 15 years of a life lived in Dante's orbit, and what Dante thought he understood now about the cost of that, the wearing down of it, the way certain kinds of loyalty require a self-erasure that eventually the self refuses. He had a daughter, Dante said. She's 12, lives with her mother in Marseille. He sends money every month. He stopped. Victor knew that too. The number he offered, I think part of it was positioned as security. For the girl. Marisela held her tea and said nothing. That doesn't make it right, Dante said. No, she said. But it's why it happened, he said. And I should have known it was a vulnerability. I knew he had the daughter. I knew about the arrangement with the mother. I should have been... He stopped. I should have been paying different attention. You trusted him, she said. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse, she agreed. It's a reason. Those are different things. She looked at him. Your mother taught you that? You that or mine? Something happened in his face, brief, unguarded. Mine, he said. She used to say that the difference between a reason and an excuse is whether you're using it to understand or to avoid. Smart woman. She was, he said. The past tense landed quietly between them. She set down her tea. The room was very still. Outside the windows, Seoul had moved into its late-night register, the traffic thinner, the lights on the lower floors going dark in patches, the city breathing at a slower rhythm. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to know that I'm asking it because I need a real answer, not because I'm building to something. He looked at her. All right. Do you think I'm safe? She said. Genuinely. In your life. In the specific shape of your life as it actually is. Not as you'd like it to be or as you're working toward. As it is right now. Do you think I'm safe in it? The question sat between them. She watched him receive it, watched him take it seriously in the way that mattered, not the performance of taking it seriously, but the actual thing, the stillness that came over his face when he was not managing his response but actually sitting with a question. He was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, I think you are safer with me than you would be without me, given that you are already known to be connected to me. That's the honest answer, and it's not the same as telling you that you're safe in any absolute sense, because I don't think that's true, and I'm not going to tell you it is. She nodded slowly. I think, he continued, that tonight was a failure of a specific kind, a gap in my information about a person I trusted, exploited by a man who is patient and methodical and has been trying to find leverage on me for 7 years. I think that gap has been closed. I don't think Victor Reinhardt will attempt something like this again, not because he's principled, but because tonight didn't work. And he now understands that using you as leverage produces the opposite of his intended outcome. He paused. But I can't promise you there will never be another Victor. I can promise you that I will not let my guard down the same way twice. She looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. I know, he said. I should have said it earlier. Yes, she said. You should have. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, I'm not leaving. He looked at her. I want that to be clear, she said. I'm not telling you any of this as a precursor to leaving. I'm telling you because if I'm going to stay in your life, and I am, then I need you to talk to me the way you talked tonight, not on the other side of a crisis, but before one. I need you to treat me like someone who can carry the real weight of your life, not just the pleasant parts of it. You shouldn't have to carry any of it, he said. Dante. She said his name the way she said it when she needed him to stop performing a version of protectiveness and actually hear her. I'm already carrying it. I've been carrying it since the day I said yes to dinner. The question is whether I'm carrying it with full information or half. He looked at her. She could see him in the process of something, the slow, difficult adjustment of a man who had organized his whole life around controlling what other people knew and didn't know for reasons that were both professional and deeply personal, and who was now being asked to reorganize that system around a different principle. She could see how hard it was. She did not look away from it. Half, he said finally. You've been carrying it with half. I know, she said. Change that. He nodded. Once. The particular nod that meant he was not agreeing as a gesture, but committing as a decision. She picked up one of the honey cakes from the tray. She ate it slowly, and it was not quite like her mother's. Different spice, different texture, made by hotel pastry staff from a description Dante had given. But it was close enough that something in her chest responded to it with the involuntary warmth of memory, the specific comfort of being known well enough that someone tried. How did you know about these? She said. You mentioned them in October, he said. We were on the phone. You were in Memphis for your mother's birthday, and you said she'd made them, and that the whole house smelled like honey for 2 days. She looked at the cake in her hand. She thought about October, about the phone call, which she remembered as a catch-up between meetings. Nothing landmark about it. She had been standing in her mother's kitchen in Memphis, leaning against the counter, and the house had smelled like honey, and she had mentioned it because it was present and pleasant, and the words were just there. He had remembered. She set the cake down and looked at him and felt the full particular weight of what it meant to be known by someone. Not perfectly, not without cost, not in some frictionless version of intimacy that only existed in the imagination of people who had never tried to actually know another human being, but genuinely, in the real, expensive, imperfect way. The way that required attention sustained over time and mistakes made and things said too late and things said badly and things said at 11:40 in a hotel room in Seoul after the worst birthday party in living memory. I love you, she said, simply, without architecture around it. He looked at her with the expression she had never found a word for, the one from the hotel room mirror, from the ballroom, from every room they had shared. And he said, I know. A pause. I love you too. That's not the problem. I know it's not the problem, she said. I just wanted to say it in a room that wasn't on fire. Something moved in his face, something that was close to the real smile, the unmanaged one. Fair, he said. She picked up her tea again. She looked at the window. The city below was dark in patches now, the late-night grit of it, The particular beauty of a city in its quiet hours when the day's performance has stopped, and what remains is simply the fact of the place, the lights that stay on because someone is still in them. What happens tomorrow? She said. Tomorrow, Dante said, the Quan Group issues a public statement acknowledging what happened tonight. The language has already been agreed. My communications team reviewed it an hour ago. What does it say? That a guest at a private event hosted by Viscari Holdings was subjected to behavior that was discriminatory and unacceptable, and that the Quan Group has taken full responsibility for the conduct of its family members present at the event. It doesn't name me, she said. Not a question. It doesn't name you, he said, unless you want it to. That was your choice to make, and I held it open. She considered this. She thought about what naming herself in that statement would mean, the reach of it, the exposure, the transformation of an evening she had survived privately into a public narrative that would attach to her name in search results and news archives for years. She thought about what her mother would say, which was probably something practical about the difference between being right and being known to be right, and whether you needed both or just one. Don't name me, she said. All right. But the footage, she said, the recordings your team pulled. They exist, he said. They will continue to exist. Whether they become public depends on whether the people responsible for tonight behave in the way they've agreed to behave. That's a leash, she said. Yes, he said, a permanent one. She absorbed this. It was not the version of justice her mother would have described on Sunday mornings, the clean and uncomplicated variety. It was the version that existed in the actual world, practical and imperfect, built from the available materials. She wasn't sure whether to be troubled by it or simply to recognize it for what it was. Victor Reinhardt, she said. Victor Reinhardt is going to spend the next 18 months watching his Southern Corridor operations fail in ways that look, from the outside, like market forces, Dante said. Nothing traceable, nothing dramatic, just the slow, inexorable withdrawal of access and cooperation from every partner and channel he depends on. That's a long time, she said. He's a patient man, Dante said. I'm a patient man. We're well matched. And Ferry? Dante was quiet for a moment. Ferry will be given enough to live on, he said. Not comfortably, but enough. He paused. His daughter will not be affected. She looked at him. That's my decision, he said. Not generosity, just his daughter is 12 years old and didn't make any phone calls. Marisela nodded. She thought about the girl in Marseille who didn't know what had happened tonight, and whose father had made a catastrophic decision and who would grow up with the shape of that decision in her life without ever fully understanding its contours. She thought about what you carried from your parents without knowing it, and what you were left with when the accounting finally came due. The guests who recorded it, she said. They've been contacted, Dante said. The footage has been deleted from the devices that were in the room. What may have been uploaded before my team reached them? We're managing that. You can't erase everything. No, he said. Some things are already out. That's the nature of phones in a room full of people. He looked at her. I'm sorry about that. I can limit it. I can't eliminate it. I know, she said. I've been black in America for 43 years. I know what it means for something to be already out and impossible to fully erase. She looked at her tea. I've been managing that my whole life. The words landed in the room and stayed, and Dante didn't fill the silence after them with something smaller, which was one of the things she valued about him. The capacity to let a true thing be the last thing said in a stretch of conversation, to not immediately cover it with something more comfortable. He said, after a long moment, Does it help? What happened tonight, the way it ended? Does it help with any of that, or does it just add to it? She thought about it seriously. She didn't give him the easy answer. Both, she said, at the same time. The way most real things are both at the same time. She looked at him. The person who poured wine on me is going to lose things, significant things. That matters. It would be dishonest to say it doesn't, she paused. And it doesn't change what it felt like to stand in that room for 20 minutes while people looked at me and decided what I was worth before I opened my mouth. Those two things are both true tonight, and they'll both still be true tomorrow. He was quiet. You can't fix the second one, she said. Nobody can. That's not on you. I know, he said. He stopped, started again. I want to be able to fix the things that happen to you. I know you do, she said. And I know it's partly about control, she said. I know, we're going to talk about that too. Not tonight. He looked at her. How many conversations are we going to have that aren't tonight? Enough, she said. We have time. They sat with that for a moment. The candles on the hotel coffee table. Someone had lit them, Ji Hae Park again probably, some instruction given in the cascade of her reconfigured evening, were burning low now, close to their holders, the flame smaller and more concentrated than it had been. Marisela set down her tea. She looked at her husband across the small warm light of the room, and she thought about January in Chicago, the snow going sideways, him in his coat with his car keys, that look on his face. She thought about the third time he had asked, and what it had taken for her to say yes, and whether she had understood then what she was saying yes to. She had understood some of it. She had not understood all of it. That was probably true of every yes anyone had ever said to anything that mattered. She picked up the honey cake again. She finished it. It was a good party, she said. Before it wasn't. He looked at her. The flowers, he said. The flowers were extraordinary, she said. The music was good. The champagne that I didn't drink was probably excellent. She looked at the roses, still standing in their arrangements around the room, white and steady and indifferent to the evening's events. You did a good job with the flowers. I had help, he said. Ji Hae Park sourced them. I told her white. Because I always choose white. Because you always choose white, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, and he stood up because she stood up. The instinctive courtesy of him, which she had initially found formal and had come to find simply true. And she crossed the small distance between the couch and the chair, and she stood in front of him, and she put her hand on the side of his face the way he had put his hands on the sides of hers in the ballroom, brief and specific and complete. Happy birthday to me, she said. He looked at her with the expression she had never found a word for, and she had decided tonight that she was no longer going to try, that some things earned the right to remain unnamed, to exist in the space between people without being required to declare themselves in language. Happy birthday, he said. She dropped her hand. She turned toward the bedroom. At the door she stopped, not dramatically, just stopped, and said without turning around, The next time you plan a surprise for me, tell me. Tell me where I'm going and what it is. I'll pretend to be surprised. She heard him exhale, not quite a laugh, the sound of something releasing. All right, he said. She went to bed. Later, much later, when the city outside had settled into its deepest register, the lights on the upper floors reduced to single windows in the dark. She lay awake for a while in the quiet of the room and thought about her mother pressing a church dress on a Sunday morning, and about what it meant to carry yourself through a room that had decided you were less than you were, and about the difference between surviving that and being unchanged by it, which was a difference she had been negotiating her whole life and would continue negotiating for the rest of it. She thought about the woman in the wine-stained dress who had stood in the center of the ballroom floor and not moved and not cried and not given anyone in that room the satisfaction of watching her become smaller. She thought about the fact that she had been the most honored person in that room from the moment she walked into it, and nobody had known, including her, and the not knowing had not changed the fact. She thought about dignity, what it was, where it lived, whether it was something given to you by the rooms you moved through or something you carried in regardless of what the room thought about it. She had always believed the second thing. Tonight had been an expensive confirmation of that belief. She closed her eyes. Outside, Soul breathed in its sleep. The roses in the other room stood in their arrangements, white and still, holding the shape of what someone had intended when he had planned an evening that had gone catastrophically wrong before it went, improbably, right. The candles had burned to nothing. The tea things sat cooling on the coffee table. The honey cake plate held only crumbs. And in the ballroom, 30 floors below, now empty and dark and awaiting the next event it would be asked to hold, the marble floor still carried, in the faint damp ghost of a stain near the center of the room, the evidence of what had happened there. By morning, the cleaning staff would have removed it completely, but the floor had held it for the hours between, the way floors hold things, silently, without judgment, with the permanent indifference of surfaces that have seen everything and forgotten nothing, that carry every mark made on them, whether or not the people who made them ever come back to look. Marisela Brooks Viscari slept. And the night held what the night holds, everything and nothing, all at once, the way nights do when the day has finally finished spending itself, and the world goes quiet, and lets what happened be exactly what it was, no more and no less. For the few hours before morning comes and requires everyone to decide, all over again, who they are and what they're worth, and whether the room they're standing in gets a vote. It doesn't. It never did.